What if the woman you loved was hiding a child? And what if you found out, not from her but from a dying woman's will, a millionaire in disguise, a secret family, and one impossible decision? This isn't just love, it's a test of everything he thought he knew. Stay until the end. You won't believe the final choice he makes. Richard Thompson, or Rich as he preferred to be called, stood in the living room of his sleek penthouse, the floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Chicago's skyline. The city shimmered below him, its lights reflecting his success. Everything he had worked for, everything he had built. At 35, he had already climbed to the top of his game. He was the CEO of one of the most successful real estate companies in the region, Marshall Properties. He was respected in business circles, admired by many, and envied by even more. But despite his outward achievements, something was missing. Something that no amount of money, power, or admiration could fill. Peace of mind. His mind was always on overdrive. Meetings, contracts, mergers, acquisitions. Every minute of his day was accounted for. Every decision calculated. In many ways, his life was a reflection of his business strategies, structured, strategic, and controlled. He had everything, or so it seemed. The penthouse, the luxury cars, the suits tailored to perfection. All the trappings of success. Yet, none of these things could silence the growing unease that had taken root in his chest. It wasn't the pressures of his empire. It wasn't the constant demands of his work. It was something far more personal. And it was slowly unraveling. Sophia Carter, his fiancée, was the source of his unease. She was beautiful, breathtaking even, and intelligent. Her career as a social media influencer had catapulted her into the public eye. With over 5 million followers, she was a household name, the picture of grace, sophistication, and success. They had been together for almost a year now, their relationship the subject of constant media attention. They were the perfect couple, on paper at least. He was a successful businessman. She was a glamorous, trending influencer. Together, they seemed to embody the image of modern-day royalty. Their whirlwind romance had begun at a charity gala where Rich had found himself captivated by Sophia's smile, her charisma, and her effortless charm. She had been exactly the kind of woman he had always imagined he would end up with. Poised, elegant, and above all, successful in her own right. He had been drawn to her instantly, their connection undeniable. And it hadn't taken long for them to fall deeply in love. Or so he thought. Their chemistry was electric, their connection undeniable, and soon they were engaged. The world around them cheered, and their engagement was plastered across every magazine and social media platform. But behind the dazzling headlines and the photo-perfect moments, Rich felt something unsettling deep within. Sophia had always been busy. She had a demanding career, one that often kept her occupied for hours on end. Rich understood that. In fact, he admired her ambition. But lately, there had been something off. The small things had begun to add up. The unexplained late nights, the missed dinner dates, the vague explanations for why she couldn't be present. "I had a meeting," she'd say, or "I had to take a call." But the excuses had started to feel thin. The woman who had once been his everything seemed to be slipping away. And no matter how much he tried to ignore it, the cracks in their perfect relationship were becoming more and more visible. One night, after another unaccounted-for evening, Rich found himself standing by the window, staring out into the city, his mind swirling. The feeling of paranoia had started to settle in. Sophia was always busy. Too busy. It wasn't just the career that concerned him. It was her increasing distance, her growing secrecy. Something was wrong. She had been distant before, but it had never felt like this. He had tried to brush it off, tried to tell himself that it was just his overactive mind playing tricks on him, but he couldn't shake the feeling. He had never been the type to doubt people, least of all someone he loved. But Sophia's behavior was starting to make him question everything. Their once constant communication had turned into sporadic messages. Her smile, once so genuine, now seemed forced when they were together. And the late-night calls, those calls that she would slip away to take, always in private, left a gnawing pit in his stomach. What was she hiding? Rich's mind went back to the past, to the pain of betrayal he had endured years earlier with Jessica. Jessica Winters had been everything he thought he wanted. Charming, beautiful, and ambitious. Their engagement had been the perfect picture of success, just like his current one with Sophia. But in the end, Jessica had shown him the true nature of people who took without giving. using him to fund her brother's failing business before unceremoniously walking away when she had nothing more to gain. The pain of that betrayal had stayed with him, the sting of being used and discarded. It was a wound that never quite healed, and now, as he looked at Sophia through the lens of that past hurt, doubts flooded his mind. Was she using him too? Was he being fooled again? The more Rich thought about it, the more his paranoia grew. He couldn't stand the uncertainty. The nagging thought that Sophia might not be the woman he thought she was consumed him. He couldn't bear the idea of being deceived again, of having his heart broken once more. And so, his mind began to spiral. He had to know the truth. He had to see it for himself. But how? The idea came to him one evening, a thought so bold, so out of character, that he almost dismissed it immediately. But the more he thought about it, the more it seemed like the only option. If he couldn't trust Sophia's words, maybe he could trust his own eyes. Maybe, just maybe, he could find out the truth by watching her. Rich had always prided himself on being in control. He had always been the one to dictate his destiny, to plan every step of his life with precision. But love, it seemed, had thrown him off course. He couldn't control his feelings, couldn't predict his fears, and now he was willing to go to extreme lengths to prove or disprove his suspicions. And so the plan was set in motion. He would disguise himself. He would become someone else. Someone who could move unnoticed in the background, watching her every move. It was an idea that sickened him, the thought of invading her privacy in such a way. But he felt as if he had no choice. His need to know the truth was stronger than his guilt. He couldn't stand the thought of living in the shadows of doubt anymore. He needed answers. Rich had no idea what would happen next. He didn't know what he would find. But one thing was clear. He was about to step into a world that was far more complicated than the one he had built for himself. And once he crossed that line, there would be no turning back. The days that followed felt like a blur. Rich found himself standing in front of a mirror, staring at his reflection. The man staring back at him was a stranger, a man who had taken a step beyond his moral boundaries. He had ordered a disguise, a simple chauffeur uniform, a fake beard, and a wig. He had registered on a luxury ride-sharing app, the kind that catered to the city's elite. He would become someone else entirely, someone invisible, someone who could follow Sophia without her knowing. He couldn't believe he was actually doing this. He had always prided himself on being honest, transparent, and direct. But now he was about to become a man of deception, a man who would stalk the woman he loved in order to protect himself from the fear of being hurt again. But as he adjusted the fake beard, something within him began to shift. The man in the mirror was not just a disguise. He was a reflection of Rich's growing desperation. He had lost control of his own life, his own emotions, and this was his only way of taking back that control. But would it bring him peace, or would it break everything apart? Only time would tell. The days following Rich's decision to follow Sophia had been filled with a strange mixture of determination and unease. The idea of becoming someone else, of stepping into the shadows to watch the woman he loved from a distance, was something he had never imagined himself doing. It went against everything he had built his life around: honesty, trust, and transparency. Yet his mind had been clouded with doubt, a gnawing uncertainty that had taken hold of him ever since the cracks in their seemingly perfect relationship began to form. Rich had never been the type of man to sneak around or to be deceitful. But as the days wore on, his paranoia grew. The fear of losing Sophia, the same fear that had driven him to lock himself away emotionally in the past, began to spiral out of control. And in the face of that fear, he found himself making a decision that felt both like an act of self-preservation and an unforgivable betrayal. He had convinced himself that this was the only way to get answers. If he couldn't trust what Sophia told him, he would have to see it for himself. The thought of another betrayal, another loss, was something he simply couldn't bear. He had already lost Jessica to deception and betrayal. He wasn't ready to lose again, especially not to someone like Sophia, who he thought was different. The first step was simple. He walked into a costume store feeling a twinge of guilt as he picked up a fake beard and a wig. He had never once thought he would be the type of man to wear such things. But here he was, preparing to disguise himself as someone completely different, someone who could blend into the background of Sophia's life without her noticing. The idea made him sick to his stomach, but the fear of being left in the dark, of not knowing the truth, drove him forward. Rich had always been a man who took control of his life. never letting go of the reins for anyone. But now he found himself at the mercy of his own fear. The thought of not knowing what Sophia was doing, of what she might be hiding from him, was enough to make him feel like he was losing grip on his own reality. He had built an empire from the ground up, and yet, when it came to the woman he loved, he felt utterly powerless. The costume shop had provided what he needed: a chauffeur's uniform, glasses, and the disguise that would turn him into someone completely unrecognizable to Sophia. It was a mask, and it was meant to give him the anonymity he craved, the distance he needed to observe her without being detected. Rich didn't know what he would find once he began this charade, but he was determined to find the truth. He didn't care about the cost anymore. His obsession with certainty outweighed everything else. The next step was even more unsettling. Rich signed up for a luxury ride-sharing service, one that catered to the elite of Chicago. It was a service that Sophia had used several times, and it seemed like the perfect opportunity to get close to her without raising suspicion. He had spent hours carefully crafting his persona, choosing the right name, the right backstory, even adjusting his voice to sound just a little different. He wasn't just disguising his face, he was becoming someone else entirely. When the day arrived, Rich found himself sitting in a modest Honda Civic waiting for his first assignment. He had never imagined that this would be the way he would discover the truth about the woman he loved. He had hoped that the issues between them could be resolved with open communication, but now he wasn't so sure. The doubts had clouded his mind for too long, and he knew that he had to see things with his own eyes, no matter how uncomfortable the process might be. Sophia's first request came through, and Rich felt his heart race as he saw her name on the screen. She was about to step into the back of his car, unaware that the man she had been confiding in, the one she trusted, was now hiding behind a mask. As he pulled up to the Ritz-Carlton, he couldn't help but notice the unease in his chest. This wasn't just about watching her anymore. It was about confronting his own fears, the insecurities he had tried so hard to bury. Sophia got into the car, her usual confident demeanor intact, her eyes glued to her phone. She didn't look up, didn't acknowledge him. To her, he was just another driver. Rich couldn't help but study her from the rearview mirror, taking in her beauty, her poise, her aura. She looked as perfect as ever. Glamorous, sophisticated, and so far removed from the life he was leading. But there was something different about her now. Something that felt distant, almost like a stranger. The silence in the car was thick, and Rich could feel the weight of his decision. He had become Samir, a mere figure in the background of her world, observing from a distance. He knew what he had to do. He had to watch. He had to see where she went, who she met, and what she was really doing when she wasn't with him. But the guilt gnawed at him as he drove, the weight of what he was doing hanging over him like a dark cloud. As they drove through the city, Rich tried to calm his nerves. He had made this choice, but now that he was in the middle of it, the reality of what he had become, the man hiding behind a false identity, felt like a betrayal in itself. What if he didn't like what he discovered? What if he found out that his fears were justified? He had already suffered from the pain of being deceived once before, and the thought of going through it again was unbearable. Sophia directed him to a neighborhood that was far from the luxurious life she presented on social media. It was a quiet, modest area, one that Rich hadn't seen her visit before. She instructed him to stop in front of a small house with peelings, paint, a stark contrast to the glamorous settings he was accustomed to. She stepped out without saying a word, walking toward the house. A small child, no older than 6, ran out to greet her, and Rich's heart skipped a beat. He had never heard Sophia mention a child before, and the sight of her embracing the little girl, the familiarity between them, struck him deeply. He had no idea who the child was, but something inside him told him that this was important. This was a part of Sophia's life she had kept hidden from him. As he sat in the car, watching her enter the house without knocking, Rich's mind raced. Who was this family? Why had she never mentioned them? For a long moment, Rich remained in the car, frozen in place. He knew he shouldn't be doing this. He knew it wasn't right to spy on her, to invade her privacy in this way. But the need to know, to confirm his suspicions, was overpowering. He had to understand who Sophia really was, who she was when she wasn't with him, when the facade of their perfect relationship was stripped away. When Sophia finally emerged from the house, she was empty-handed, a look of relief on her face as she climbed back into the car. The child had disappeared back inside, and the door had closed behind her. Rich didn't speak as he drove away, the question swirling in his mind. What was this life she had been hiding? Who were these people she had been so careful to keep from him? And why had she felt the need to keep them a secret? As the car ride continued, the silence between them stretched on. Sophia didn't speak, her eyes fixed on her phone, and Rich didn't know what to say. He had seen something he wasn't prepared for. The woman he had been so sure of, the woman he had loved, was more complicated than he had ever imagined. And, as they drove through the streets of Chicago, Rich realized that in the pursuit of truth, he had uncovered something far more complex than he had anticipated. He wasn't just uncovering Sophia's secrets, he was confronting his own insecurities, his fears of being vulnerable, and his obsession with control. He had stepped into her world, but what he had found there had only deepened the mystery of who she truly was. The days that followed felt like a series of tangled thoughts and growing uncertainties for Rich. He had crossed a line, one that he could never uncross, and the reality of his actions began to weigh heavily on him. His mind, once focused on building an empire, was now preoccupied with the unsettling images of Sophia's life outside of their relationship. He had always prided himself on being a man of control, but in this moment he realized how deeply, out of control, he had let his insecurities drive him. The truth he thought he would find, clear, definitive, and comforting, had only led him deeper into a labyrinth of doubt and regret. He had expected answers, but what he had uncovered was far more complex. The woman he loved had a life, a history that he had never truly known. The child he had seen with her in that modest home was not a stranger to her, and yet Sophia had never once mentioned her. Why had she kept it hidden? What else was she keeping from him? Rich had spent countless nights in the dim light of his penthouse, staring out at the skyline, trying to make sense of the woman he thought he knew. He had been so focused on finding the truth that he hadn't stopped to ask himself what he was really searching for. Was he looking for a reason to confirm his fears, or was he hoping for something that could absolve him of his own guilt? He had been hurt before, and the pain of betrayal had left a scar that no amount of success could heal. But now, as he sat in the silence of his penthouse, he was beginning to realize that his actions were driven by fear, not love. The fear of losing. Sophia had been consuming him, and it had led him to do something unthinkable. He had violated the very trust he had tried to build with her, the trust that had once been the foundation of their relationship. How could he expect her to forgive him when he had betrayed her in the most intimate way possible? The man who had built his life on honesty and transparency had resorted to deception and manipulation. And for what? To satisfy a need for control? To protect himself from the vulnerability that love demanded. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a message alert on his phone. It was from Sophia. "I need to talk to you," the message read. His heart skipped a beat and an uneasy knot twisted in his stomach. He didn't know what to expect. Would she confront him about what he had done? Would she walk away? He didn't know if he was ready for whatever was coming, but he knew one thing. He couldn't hide from this forever. The truth had a way of revealing itself, no matter how hard we tried to suppress it. Later that evening, they met at a quiet cafe, a place they had visited before, when their connection had still felt effortless and free. Sophia was already seated. When he arrived, her eyes tired but steady. She didn't look surprised to see him, but there was something different in her demeanor, something distant. The walls she had carefully built around her were now more evident, and Rich could sense the change in the air between them. "Sophia," Rich began, his voice shaky. She held up a hand, silencing him before he could finish. "Rich, I think we both know why we're here." He nodded, his heart sinking further into his chest. "I should have trusted you. I'm sorry. I know what I did was wrong." Sophia looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "You know, I always thought trust was the one thing we could both count on. When I moved in with you, when we got engaged, I trusted you. I trusted you with my heart, with my life." "I know," Rich whispered. "And I betrayed that trust. I was scared, Sophia. I didn't know what to do. I was afraid of losing you, of you disappearing from my life like Jessica did. I thought I had to protect myself." Sophia's gaze softened for a moment, but then she looked away, the pain evident in her eyes. "But Rich, that's the problem. You don't trust me. You never did. You were always so focused on controlling everything around you, on creating this perfect life that you forgot what really matters. You thought you could control me, control the situation, but you can't. Not like this. Not through lies and deceit." "I wasn't trying to control you," Rich said quickly. "No," she interrupted, her voice firm. were trying to control the narrative. You couldn't stand the idea of not knowing everything, of not being in control of every little detail of my life. And that's not love, Rich, that's fear. Fear of being vulnerable. Fear of being hurt again. Rich swallowed hard, the weight of her words sinking into him like an anchor pulling him under. He had thought he was protecting himself, but now he realized that he had only damaged the very thing he had been trying to protect, their relationship. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice raw with emotion. "I know I've hurt you and I don't know how to fix it." Sophia's face softened, and for a brief moment he saw the woman he had fallen in love with, the woman who had been so open, so full of life. "I know you're sorry, Rich. And I know you love me. But love isn't about controlling the other person, about trying to make everything perfect. It's about trust, vulnerability, and honesty. And right now, I'm not sure we have that anymore." Rich closed his eyes, the pain of her words cutting deeper than anything he had ever experienced. He had always been so certain of himself, so sure that he could handle anything that came his way. But this was something he couldn't control. This was a feeling he couldn't fix with a business deal, a nice dinner, or a grand gesture. Sophia continued, her voice softer now. "I can't be with someone who doesn't trust me, who doesn't see me for who I am, not for the image I project. I've spent so much of my life trying to be perfect, trying to meet expectations, other people's expectations, even your expectations. But I can't do that anymore. I can't be someone I'm not, just to make you feel secure." "I don't want you to change," Rich said, his voice thick with emotion. I just wanted to keep you. I didn't know how to deal with the fear of losing you." Sophia sighed, shaking her head. "You don't keep someone by trying to control them, Rich. You keep someone by trusting them, by letting them be who they are. And right now I need to figure out who I am without all the expectations, without the pressure of trying to be perfect." The silence between them stretched on, the weight of their conversation settling heavily in the air. Rich felt like he was drowning in the realization of what he had done, what he had become. In his quest to protect himself from the pain of losing her, he had pushed Sophia away in the worst way possible. Sophia stood up and Rich instinctively reached out for her, but she pulled away before he could touch her. "I need space, Rich. I can't do this right now. I need to think." Rich watched her walk away, the pain in his chest more excruciating than any wound he had ever experienced. He had always thought he was the one in control of his life, of his emotions, of his destiny. But now, standing alone in the cafe, he realized how deeply he had misunderstood love. Love was not something you could control or force. It was something you had to nurture, to trust, and to let grow freely. As Sophia disappeared into the night, Rich stood motionless, the weight of everything crashing down on him. He had crossed a line he could never return from, and now he had to face the consequences of his actions. For the first time in a long while, Rich understood what it truly meant to be vulnerable. And it was the most painful lesson of his life. Rich sat in his office the next morning, the weight of his conversation with Sophia still pressing down on him like a physical ache. He had spent the night pacing in his penthouse, unable to shake the image of her walking away, her figure slowly disappearing into the night, leaving him alone in the silence of his mistakes. The pain of it was raw and fresh, like a wound that had just been opened, and he couldn't escape it. It was a pain he had caused, and it was the one thing he couldn't fix with money or power or influence. The office around him, which once felt like a fortress of control, now felt like a cage. Every email, every meeting, every deal seemed meaningless in comparison to what he had lost. He had worked so hard to build this life, this empire, but it was all crumbling. Not because of a bad business deal, not because of a financial loss, but because of his own inability to trust, because he had feared vulnerability more than he had feared losing her. He thought of the words Sophia had said to him the night before. Love isn't about controlling the other person. It's about trust, vulnerability, and honesty. And in that moment, Rich realized how little he had understood those words until now. Love for him had always been something he could manage, something that, like his business, could be built and shaped and molded to fit the image of success. But love wasn't like that. It wasn't about molding another person into something you could control. It was about seeing them for who they were, letting them be who they needed to be, and trusting them enough to allow them into your world. He had failed at that. The thought of Sophia, of her smile and her warmth filled his mind. She had always been the one who could make everything feel light, even when the weight of his world threatened to crush him. But now she was gone. perhaps for good. And all he could do was sit in this sterile, silent office, surrounded by all his achievements, yet feeling emptier than he ever had before. The ringing of his phone pulled him out of his thoughts. It was Marco, his longtime friend and driver. Rich had always trusted Marco, and in some ways he had seen him as the one person who could understand his inner struggles. "Boss, you okay?" Marco's voice was thick with concern. Rich hesitated, before answering, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know, Marco. I really don't know. She left last night. Sophia left. And I don't know if she'll ever come back." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and Rich could practically hear Marco thinking through his words. "What happened?" Marco asked finally, his voice gentle but steady. Rich closed his eyes and exhaled sharply. "I screwed up, Marco. I didn't trust her. I was so damn scared of losing her that I pushed her away. I thought I had to control everything. I thought that if I could just keep her close enough, just keep an eye on her, then I could protect myself from being hurt again. But in the process, I pushed her away in the worst way possible." Marco didn't respond immediately, and Rich could hear him shuffling around in the background, probably trying to figure out how to respond. "You made a mistake, Rich, a big one. But you're human, and that means you can fix this. If you really want to fix it." "I don't even know where to start," Rich admitted, his voice cracking slightly. "I've already lost her once, and I can't bear the thought of losing her again. But I don't know how to get her back. How do you fix something like this?" "You fix it by showing up," Marco said, his voice firm. "You show her that you're serious. You show her that you understand what you did, that you've learned from it. But you can't fix it by chasing her or trying to control the situation. You fix it by giving her the space she needs and being honest with her. You've got to be real, Rich. You've got to be the man she fell in love with, not the man you thought you should be. The real you." Rich thought about Marco's words, feeling a surge of both guilt and hope. He realized Marco was right. The only way forward was honesty. He had spent too long hiding behind his own walls, hiding behind his success, his power, his wealth. But none of that mattered now. It was time to strip away the facade. He had to be vulnerable, to let go of his fear and show Sophia that he was ready to face the truth no matter how difficult it might be. The following days were the hardest of Rich's life. He knew that he couldn't go to Sophia right away. He couldn't just show up at her door or call her and expect everything to be fixed. She had made it clear that she needed space, and as much as it pained him, he had to respect that. But that didn't mean he could just sit around and do nothing. He had to take action. He had to change. He spent the next few days reflecting on everything that had gone wrong. He thought about the way he had tried to control everything, from his career to his relationship with Sophia. He thought about the moment when he realized that his need for control had become more important than the woman he loved. And he thought about the kind of man he wanted to be, not just for Sophia, but for himself. Rich spent hours on the phone with therapists, trying to understand what had driven him to act the way he had. He signed up for counseling, not just to fix the damage he had done to his relationship, but to work on himself, to figure out why he had been so afraid to trust, to let go of control. It wasn't easy. He had always been the one who had all the answers, the one who had it all figured out. But now, he was starting from scratch, learning how to be open and honest, learning how to trust again. At night, he would walk around the city, hoping for a sign, a way to reach Sophia. He had never felt more lost, more disconnected from everything he had once believed was important. But with each step, he began to realize that the things he had always thought were important, his business, his success, were just distractions. The only thing that mattered now was Sophia, and he was willing to do whatever it took to make things right. After 3 long days of soul-searching, Rich finally gathered the courage to reach out to Sophia. He knew he couldn't call her. Not yet. He couldn't expect her to answer his phone calls after everything that had happened. So he decided to write her a letter. In the letter, Rich poured out his heart. He acknowledged his mistakes, his fear of losing her, and his realization that he had let his insecurities drive him to make decisions that hurt both of them. He told her that he had been going to therapy, that he was committed to doing the work necessary to change, not just for her, but for himself. He told her that he missed her more than words could express, and that he was ready to give her the space she needed, but also ready to work through everything together if she was willing. When he finally sent the letter, he felt a strange sense of relief. It was out of his hands now. All he could do was wait and hope that Sophia would read it, understand it, and perhaps someday come back to him. But as he sat in his penthouse that evening, staring out at the glowing city lights, Rich realized that no matter what happened next, he had changed. He had begun to confront his own fears and insecurities. He had begun to understand what it meant to love, not just as a means of control, but as a way of letting go. And perhaps that was the most important lesson of all. The days that followed felt like an eternity. Rich spent every moment reflecting, his thoughts often running in circles, making him question every decision he had made. It had been a week since he sent the letter to Sophia, a raw and vulnerable confession of his mistakes. A letter that carried with it the weight of his regret, his realization, and his plea for a second chance. He had written from the depths of his heart, but now he was waiting. And waiting for him had never been easy. He had always prided himself on being a man who took control, who made things happen. But love, real love, wasn't something you could control. It wasn't something you could force into existence with sheer willpower or manipulate to fit your needs. He had learned that the hard way. And now he found himself in a place of uncertainty, not knowing if the woman he loved would come back to him, if she would even read his words, let alone forgive him. Sophia had asked for space, and Rich had honored her wishes. He had learned to be patient, to let go of his need to fix everything immediately. This wasn't a problem that could be solved with a business strategy, with calculated moves or quick solutions. It required time. Time to heal. Time to rebuild trust. Time to let go of the fears that had driven him to betray her in the first place. Every morning, Rich woke up with the same question hanging in his mind. Had she read the letter? Was she even thinking about him? He had imagined this moment countless times, what he would say, what she would say. But now that it was real, he felt unmoored. His heart longed for answers, but he knew that no matter how hard he searched for them, the answers wouldn't come easily. He had crossed a line, and now the only thing left to do was wait. To trust that Sophia would make the decision that was right for her, and that whatever happened next would be part of the journey they needed to take. On the fourth day after sending the letter, Rich couldn't sit still anymore. He found himself driving aimlessly through the city, needing to escape the suffocating silence of his penthouse. He knew where he was heading before his mind had even fully processed the decision. He drove to the cafe where he and Sophia had shared so many conversations, where they had laughed, argued, and loved. The cafe had been a place of refuge, a neutral ground where they could be themselves, free from the expectations of their respective worlds. Now, it felt like a sanctuary of memories, a place where he could be reminded of who they were together before everything had fallen apart. As he entered, the familiar scent of fresh coffee and pastries hit him. The warmth of the cafe embraced him, but it didn't ease the ache in his chest. He walked to the counter, ordering the same coffee they always had when they came together. As he waited for his drink, his eyes scanned the room, hoping, wishing that Sophia would walk in and find him there, just as she had so many times before. But there was no sign of her. The empty seat at their usual table felt like an unbearable reminder of the distance between them now. Rich's thoughts were interrupted by a soft voice. "Rich?" He turned around to see her standing there, her face unreadable. Sophia. His heart leapt in his chest, a mixture of relief and anxiety rushing through him. She looked different, calmer, but there was a weight in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Her usual warmth was still present, but now it felt tempered by something deeper, something more cautious. "Hi," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I got your letter." Rich swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. "You did?" Sophia nodded. "I read it, more than once actually." The words he had written now seemed so inadequate, so simple in comparison to everything that had happened. He had poured his heart into those pages, trying to convey the depth of his regret, but now standing before her, he felt like a stranger to his own emotions. He had expected some sort of reaction, but the silence between them hung heavy, filled with 1,000 unspoken words. "I didn't know what to expect when I read it," Sophia continued. "Part of me wanted to scream, to throw it away and never think about it again. But part of me needed to hear you say it. I needed to know that you understood what you did, that you understood why it hurt so much." Rich's chest tightened at her words. He had known deep down that he couldn't just write a letter and expect everything to be forgiven. The pain he had caused was too deep, too real. There were no quick fixes, no magic words that would make it go away. "I do understand," he said quietly. "And I am so sorry, Sophia. I wish I could take it all back. I wish I could go back to the moment before I let my fear control everything. But I can't. All I can do now is promise you that I'll do everything I can to rebuild the trust we lost." Sophia didn't respond immediately. She simply took a deep breath and sat down at the table across from him, her gaze fixed on her coffee cup. For a long moment, the only sound in the cafe was the soft murmur of other patrons, the clink of cups, and the distant hum of conversation. It felt as though the world outside had stopped moving, and all that mattered was this fragile moment between them. Finally, Sophia spoke. "You were right about one thing, Rich. You didn't trust me. But more than that, you didn't trust yourself. You didn't trust me to love you the way you needed to be loved. And you didn't trust me enough to let me be who I am without the pressure to fit some perfect mold." Rich's heart cracked at her words. He had never realized how much his need for control had impacted her, how much it had made her feel small, unseen. He had been so wrapped up in his own insecurities, in his own fear of losing her, that he had ignored her needs. He had pushed her into a corner, and now he was paying the price. "I know," he whispered. "I know now. I didn't see it before, but I see it now. And I'm sorry for every moment I made you feel like you couldn't be yourself. You deserve better than that. You deserve someone who can trust you completely, someone who can love you for exactly who you are." Sophia's eyes softened, but the walls she had built up were still there. She wasn't ready to let go of the hurt just yet. "I don't know if I can just forget what happened, Rich. I don't know if I can trust you again. Trust is something that takes time to rebuild, and I'm not sure I'm ready for that yet." Rich felt a pang of pain in his chest, but he understood. Trust was not something that could be given lightly. It wasn't something that could be rushed or forced. It had to be earned over time through consistent actions and unwavering honesty. "I'm not asking you to forget," he said quietly. "I'm just asking for a chance to prove to you that I'm not the man I was, that I've learned from this, and that I'm willing to do the work to earn your trust again. I'm not asking for us to be perfect. I'm asking for us to be real, together." Sophia looked at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face, as though trying to find some trace of the man she had once loved. And then, for the first time since their conversation had begun, she nodded slowly. "I can't promise that everything will be okay right away, Rich, but I'm willing to try. I'm willing to take this one step at a time. I just need you to be patient. I need you to prove to me that you really mean it." Rich's heart surged with hope, but he knew better than to rush this moment. They had a long road ahead of them, and it wasn't going to be easy. But for the first time in a long time, he believed that it was possible. He could see the glimmer of hope in Sophia's eyes, and that was enough. "I will," he said, his voice full of conviction. "I'll be patient. I'll wait for as long as it takes. And I'll show you every day that I can be the man you need me to be." As they sat together in that quiet cafe, the weight of their past still hung between them. But there was something else there too. A spark of possibility. A chance to rebuild, to love again, to trust again. It wasn't going to be easy, and there would be challenges ahead. But for the first time in weeks, Rich felt like he was on the right path. Not just to winning Sophia back, but to becoming the man he had always wanted to be. For her. For himself. And that was enough for now. One step at a time. Just when Rich began to believe the road to reconciliation had opened, a shocking email arrived. It was from a law firm. Sophia was being named the legal guardian of Luna, the little girl from the house in South Chicago, as Marta's health had declined faster than expected. The twist? Sophia hadn't told Rich, not out of malice, but because she feared overwhelming him with a responsibility that wasn't his. This revelation struck Rich like lightning. Was he truly ready to embrace the reality of Sophia's full world? A child, a dying guardian, and a life far messier than the one he had imagined. This moment would demand more than just regret. It would require a life-changing choice. Was Rich willing to love not just Sophia, but everything she came with, even the painful, complicated parts? If you were moved by this turning point, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more gripping, emotional stories that go beyond the surface.